The following program is being brought to you by Rain of Fire Radio, a media outreach arm of Rain of Fire Evangelical Ministries. Our commitment is to sponsor programs that will assist in living a Christian life and win others through teaching the finished work of Jesus Christ. Welcome to Delivered or Deceived with your host, Rand Berkey. Rand is a former cult member who now educates people on the dangers of these types of groups, as well as people who would seek to exploit and terrorize others. Rand has devoted his life to providing assistance to those who have been hurt. No one wants to be led through the wilderness by a guide who has never been there. He has, and his desire is that you will find yourself delivered and not deceived.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Rain of Fire Christian Radio. Our program tonight, Delivered or Deceived, Chapter 9, The Deeper Mysteries of God. As in every broadcast, I'd like to set the stage sharing one of the foundational scriptures for Rain of Fire Evangelical Ministries, as well as Rain of Fire Radio. In Luke 4:17 through 19, it states, "And Jesus was handed the book of the prophet Isaiah. And when he had opened the book, he found the place where it was written, 'The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and the recovery of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord.' Christ is the message, and I'm only one of the bearers for the message." So chapter 9. This is basically one of the beliefs of the Way International, that there would be one world government controlled by the communists, one world religion controlled by the Catholics, and one world monetary exchange controlled by the Jews. And this was on the advanced class in 1983 in Emporia, Kansas. There's always have to be some, secret and sly and insidious thing that the truth has to stand up against. Otherwise, it doesn't seem like there's much to it. But the more evil you can make the world outside look, the better that it looks on the inside. However, one of the things that you find out is that the better is not so great inside the group, and there's really a conflict between, would it be better to be in misery inside the group, or would it be better to step into the great unknown and possibly go to hell if you step outside the group? But this is Emporia, Kansas, and we're in the leadership training program. This is the second year. Our first year was an apprentice year. The second is basically the first year in class. And now we are at December 30th of 1982, going into 1983, and what we're doing here is coming back from our happy household holiday break and arriving back to Emporia. We arrived back at Emporia on December 30th, just in time to celebrate Werewolf's birthday, which was on the 31st. Corps members were required to move to different rooms for each block, even though we were staying on campus. The senior corps moved to different campuses, whether it was Emporia, Rome City, Indiana, Gunnison, Colorado, or New Knoxville, Ohio. The idea was to give corps members a feel for each location and to learn the heart of the way. Most Way believers have not been to these locations. When the corps members graduate and go onto the field, they can communicate what is being done at each area to other believers. We received our new room assignments and jobs for the block. When I received my assignment, I found out that I would be working in food services. This was going to be extremely difficult because I would be working the morning shift, which reported for work at 4:30 in the morning. After about a week, Rose and I, along with 22 others, were called into a meeting in Werewolf Library. After meeting at the library, we found out we were going to be part of the lead group 114. We were to leave in 2 days to go to Tenney, New Mexico. We were instructed on what to pack and taught how to conduct ourselves. We were then given a map on how to get there and $20 that we were not to use. We were to return the money when we arrived back to campus. We were given 35 hours to hitchhike the almost 800 miles to Tenney. If we did not arrive in the allotted time, we would have to turn around and come back. We were going to be gone for 10 days altogether. 2 days later, we were dropped off on the side of the highway about 6 in the morning outside of Emporia to begin our journey. We had made signs before we left the campus for each major city through which we would be traveling. This would help us weed out the rides that would only take us a few miles. Winters in Kansas are bitterly cold. The wind starts at the Rockies and picks up speed across the plains until it hits you, finding any opening in your clothes to pierce you with that icy blast. Fortunately, it was not snowing when we began our trek, yet the cold was blistering, cutting through us like a knife and making any exposed area raw. We were having difficulty getting a ride, and it took almost 8 hours before someone finally stopped to give us a ride. The people were headed to Wichita. By this time, we did not see anyone else that had been dropped off to catch a ride. We climbed in the back of their truck and went on our way. We were dropped off on the south side of Wichita and got our next ride from there to just east of Oklahoma City. And we immediately got another ride to Amarillo, Texas. From Amarillo, the next ride would take us to Clovis, New Mexico. It seemed that once we had gotten that first ride, all others seemed to be one after another. Once in Clovis, we spotted others of our groups headed for Tenney. It must have seemed strange for motorists to see groups of people hitchhiking and all going the same way. We finally got a ride to the next major town, Roswell, New Mexico. This road seemed to be even less traveled than the one we had been on to Clovis. We arrived in Roswell with only about 50 miles left to Tenney. Again, there were a number of groups trying to complete that last leg of the journey. A person with a pickup piled 10 of us and our gear into the back and delivered us to our destination. It had taken us 33 hours. We had beat the deadline. The town of Tenney consisted of a store that also has the post office and a few houses. We were to wait in an area outside the store for the lead staff to come get us. While we were waiting, the rest of the lead 114 had arrived. We were excited that we were all there. We were starting off on the right foot for sure. One of the staff members arrived, and we loaded our luggage onto the truck and started our climb up to the base camp. The building at the camp was large A-frame and that housed the staff. There were 2 sets of team leads, with one set already out with another group from another campus. We were issued our equipment and loaded our backpacks with food. After everything was done, our backpacks weighed between 40 and 60 pounds. The men volunteered to pack the ropes needed for rock climbing and the heavier cookware. We then headed into the Capitan Mountain Range. The purpose of the LEAD program was to put people in situations they had never been in before in order for them to trust God. We would be pushed to our limits at different times so we could see of what we were made. We were to follow commands of the team leads as one would leadership in the military. The Way Corp, according to Werewolf, had patterned after the Marine Corps. Werewolf had told us initially his idea was to send 50 men out into the wilderness with nothing more than a hunting knife for a year. Those that survived would be his Way Corp. The LEAD program was a much more watered down version of Wherewell's initial vision. We arrived at our camp and pitched the tents before darkness fell. As part of the conditions, we were not allowed to smoke, drink coffee, or bathe ourselves during our time of training. We each had 6 water bottles, and we were to make sure we drank all 6 each day so we would not dehydrate. We had packaged food we would cook in the mornings and evenings. For our lunches, it was nutrition bars and dried fruit. First day of hiking and learning to belay rope systems for the cliff climbing we would do later in the week. The belay system was used as a safety precaution to keep people tied into ropes so they would not fall off the face of the cliffs and plummet to their death. The next day, we went boulder climbing for part of the day to learn the techniques we would use when climbing the face of the mountains. The rest of the day, we continued to perfect the tying ourselves into the climbing gear to the point that we could do it effortlessly and with our eyes closed. We practiced all day to learn the system. We would be performing the functions of the belay for each other. We would each belay an anchor after we had our turn climbing. After we worked through the system, we would then rappel down the face of the cliff to climb up another. This was so cool for me. Maybe not so much for others, but I really enjoyed this part of it. The next day we went out to one of the walls to climb. I had never done this before and I was excited to get started. I was in the back of the line and watched closely as the others snaked their way towards the top. There were 4 different areas we could climb. I finally got my chance and tied in. Even though this area of the wall was the most difficult, it was an easy climb for me. In a little while, I was at the top and exhilarated. I tied myself into the belay and the next person up the wall. I did not get a chance to rappel back down, though, because it was getting late. We gathered up the ropes and headed back to camp. The next morning, we hiked to the face of different cliffs to climb again. Everyone got prepared, and then we started up the cliffs. The climbs are much more difficult than those we had previously encountered. Rose was not athletic, and everything that was being done was a strain and a challenge for her. She tried to find the easiest climb possible. As she started to climb, she was having great difficulty getting started. You could have heard her torrents of cursing all across the valley, but she finally made it to the top. I was in another line. It was finally my turn to tie in for my climb, and I started up the wall. This was much more difficult than my first climb. I had to struggle to find the proper hand and footholds. I constantly kept reminding myself to keep my butt sticking out so my boots would stay anchored. I made it up the wall, but my form was ugly, sometimes looking like a cat clawing its way up a tin roof. I tied myself into the belay and then was back down by rappelling. Quite a few people did not like rappelling, but I loved it. It was a shame the trip down did not last longer. I got back in line and went up a different climb. By the time everyone had gone up twice, some 3 times, it was time to go back to camp. When we got back, we found out we would be hiking up the peak of Capitan Mountain the next day. Early in the morning, we packed our sleeping bags and enough food for the hike. We would be staying on the top of the mountain that night, camping under the stars, and making our way back down the next day. We started out early in the morning. The hiking was tough. The peak of the Capitan Mountain was over 10,000 feet above sea level. There were some dangerous parts of the trail we had to traverse. During one of our rest stops, Claude, who was a branch leader, jumped all over Rose for being slow, out of shape, and causing the rest of the crew to be delayed. He warned her if she did not take care of this, she would hold my ministry back and it would be her fault. I felt pity for Rose being humiliated in front of